and welcome to the second day of GrowthNet and to this plenary session on defining and generating the talents and skills for the digital economy. This is the big issue of the day. Technology, especially the digital economy, is transforming the way we work and how we function. And the winners will probably be the countries who manage this transition efficiently and effectively. So that's the focus of this session. The keynote address will be given by the Singapore Minister for Education, Mr. Ong. He is not a stranger to India, but I think that this is his first visit as Minister of Education to India. Am I right in that? I think I'm right. He has been here with the Prime Minister of Singapore a couple of years ago, but I think this is his first visit, and we are delighted to have him here. We also have two members on the panel who will give their comments and views after the Minister's keynote. And from a corporate perspective, we have Anita Rajan from the Tata Group. She's doing, I think, amazing work in this area, and we look forward to hearing from Anita. And on a much broader perspective, we have the UN organization, ILO, and we have Mr. Gabriel Bordozo to give us a broader perspective of what is happening at the ILO level on skills in this. Before I ask the Minister to give his keynote, I want to say a few things. Not about skills, not about digital economy, but about Singapore. I am an unabashed admirer, respecter, follower, worshipper of Singapore for 26 years. I first went there in 1993, and when I was in CII, and we opened our office in Singapore in 1994, and we've stayed there ever since. And I have never failed to admire the process of reinvention that Singapore goes through, constantly reviewing what it's doing and how to go forward, how to stay relevant. They say how to stay relevant. I've heard this in Singapore. It's a small country, and how to remain competitive. So it's an amazing example to many other countries. I once wrote an article in the national newspapers, and it said, what India can learn from Singapore, A to Z. And for each letter of the alphabet, we had something to learn from Singapore. And that's the agenda that India has with Singapore. Second, Singapore is our best friend in the region, in Southeast Asia, but I sometimes think that Singapore is our best friend across the world. Third, the portfolio of education in Singapore is a big portfolio. In some countries, education, human resources development, traditionally has not been given the kind of importance that foreign affairs is given or finance is given and others. But in Singapore, education means how you grow your people, how you grow your kids, how you give them roots, how you give them wings to fly. So the concept, the vision of a Singapore education minister is huge, and therefore his responsibility. A couple of years ago, the minister spoke to us in Singapore when we had our India-Singapore Strategic Dialogue meeting, and he was very, very impressive with his thought process, with his articulation. So I'm truly delighted that you're here today, delighted that we could get to you a few months earlier to block your diary for this. And the minister is now the fourth successive cabinet minister of Singapore to come here and address the GrowthNet. And we hope to continue that tradition and continue with Singapore's participation in GrowthNet. Minister, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Tarun Das, for your kind words. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, my fellow panelists, good morning. It is my pleasure to join everyone today for the GrowthNet Summit in New Delhi. It is a summit that Singapore ministers try not to miss. We have a forward-looking theme for this morning's plenary session, which is talent and skills for a digital economy. I will start by talking about a movie, and that's 3 years ago, 2016, or 4 years ago. My favorite movie is actually a Hindi film, which is Dangal. I was watching it on a plane because my friends told me it's really good. So I watched it, and it clicked immediately because I also have 2 daughters, like Amir Khan in the show, and really enjoyed it. And after that, my wife was seated next to me, and I told her, you have to watch this. It's about parents with 2 daughters. So I didn't tell her it's about wrestling. So she watched it, and she loved it too. And towards the last quarter of the film, I leaned over and watched it all over with her again. She had the headphones, so I watched it as a silent movie, but equally captivating. And a great film because depicted resilience, courage, fighting against the odds, above all, fatherly love. A father that took their 2 daughters into a very unconventional path, professional wrestlers. I will never do that to my 2 daughters. But he did it against social expectations. He did it against social ridicule even. So it made me reflect on the burden of expectations that society and family, we put on our young. Get a degree, get married, buy your homes, have children, make me a grandpa. And these are widely held views in societies across Asia, in India, Singapore, everywhere. And they are virtuous, but also traditional. The younger generation, they have quite different ideas. They grow up with the internet, which offers a powerful window to the world right in the palms of their hands. And many have dreams different from the tried and tested path that earlier generations have. And their hopes and aspirations are different because it's made possible by the digital economy. Because industries are organized differently. Work is carried out differently. They can disintermediate. The whole world can be their market. So fulfilling the dreams of the young, and that is the first of 2 themes that I would like to talk about today. How the world has changed and continues to change has profound implications on the way we educate our young. And we need to do 2 things. First, ground them in skills. Second, start young. And why do I say that? We know knowledge and skills go hand in hand. One must go with the other. But the internet, it has made knowledge so easily available, and therefore skills has become a lot more valuable in the digital economy. And that is why companies like Google and Apple, they are now hiring people based on skills and not just based on whether you have a college degree. And many companies are moving in that directions. Furthermore, robots, computers, they can easily take over routine and mundane, repetitive tasks that humans are now doing. So the way a worker avoids being replaced by computers and robots is to attain skills to a level of a craftsman or an artisan where a machine cannot replicate. So grounding young people in skills is critical. And it must start early because skills mastery, that is a lifetime commitment. And it requires passion to drive you to learn your whole life. To have passion, that must be cultivated through a period of exploration and self-discovery, preferably when the person is young. And for you to explore and to discover yourself, you must start even younger to make learning fun, to make learning joyous. And hence, our education reforms must start with the very young. Prenatal care matters, but it is by and large not the problem in Singapore. But what we are doing is to build up infant care and early childhood education. In particular, we have been investing heavily in preschool, age 5 and 6. The government spending in the preschool sector has increased 2.5 times from 2012 to 2017, and is set to increase further. We are not seeking to cram calculus, science into preschool. In fact, our emphasis is quite the opposite. Let the children learn through play, develop social, emotional skills, and be exposed to languages, especially English and their mother tongues. And this is to lay a good foundation for them to learn the joy of learning. And then they enter primary and secondary school. And we also seek to bring about greater joy of learning in those stages. Our problem is we have a very heavy emphasis on examinations and academic grades, like many Asian societies, to the extent that I think it's becoming somewhat counterproductive. And so we need to dial back that overemphasis on examination and grades, and we are doing that in a few ways. The first is to reduce assessments and examinations load in primary and secondary school, at least by 25% across the board, nationwide. And we announced it earlier this year. One of the pleasant things I did when I first became education minister. So for young students in primary 1 and 2, we totally remove examinations to help them focus on learning rather than focus on taking examinations. We have a standardized national examination at the end of primary 6. We call it the PSLE, the Primary School Leaving Examination. Ask any Singaporean parent and student, they will remember it. Some have nightmares about it. Because how a child performs in PSLE decide which secondary school they go to. And therefore, there's a perception that this is a very high-stake examination. So we decided we can't do away with PSLE, but we are changing the scoring system. Currently, the scoring system finely differentiates the performance of students, and we are revamping it so that students are banded by achievement bands, achievement levels. So we try not to differentiate two students by 1 point. That's a false accuracy. Band them together in the same achievement level. It may therefore affect if both of us are applying to the same secondary school with 1 place left, then we draw lots. Rather, I think that is better than to pay such a high price instead in the form of stress and a false sense of accuracy just to differentiate the two students. I think drawing lots is fine. So hopefully this will reduce the stress level of both students and parents and not make the PSLE a do or die examination, which it is not. Reducing examination load frees up curriculum time, which is really what we are going after, because that provides space and time for schools to develop students more holistically. They can go for more outdoor adventure learning. They can conduct classes in more fun and interactive way, inquiry-based ways. And through applied learning, where students get to build their own solar-powered cars, their own windmills, program their own robots, make lessons come to life. And students are encouraged to work together, try, fail, fail, never mind, try again, which is an essential life skill they need to have. We have developed a student learning space. This is an online resource where we put our entire school curriculum on it to facilitate self-learning by students. And this is quite similar in concept to the Atal Tinkering Labs, which have been established by Niti Aayog in schools across India to foster curiosity and innovation through hands-on learning. Another big change. For 40 years, we have a streaming system where we stream students into 3 separate courses in secondary schools to cater to their different learning abilities. Differentiated learning has helped reduce attrition rates dramatically over the years. It used to be over 30% in the 1970s and 80s. Now it's practically eradicated. And we are now going a step further to customize the curriculum to the students' needs, not at the course level, but at the subject level. This means instead of 3 mass customized courses, each child can have a unique combination of subjects and difficulty levels. And that's really part and parcel of the digital economy, where every single one of us can have customized products and services delivered through online and the internet. It makes running a school much more complex. And so we are taking a few years to implement this. But we believe this will help every child better discover their strengths and their abilities. So you get the drift. More customization in teaching, but less differentiation in examination scores. The same spirit is now extended to higher education through a widening of admission pathways. Our polytechnics and universities used to rely very heavily on academic results and grades for admitting students. Now, in that spirit, they have made a significant shift to also look at specific strengths of an applicant, evaluate their portfolios, their projects and activities done in school and outside of school. Our higher education system then, once you are in it, it has multiple pathways for students to choose from to help develop diverse talents of our people. So today in the landscape, we have ITE and its 3 campuses. We have 5 polytechnics and 6 autonomous government-funded universities, 3 of which are recently established only during the last 10 years. And their offerings range from academic courses to applied courses, technical hands-on courses, apprenticeships, work-study programs. So a range of courses depending on the learning needs of the student. And in the last few years, higher education has also evolved to be a lot more experiential. It's no longer just an education, but it is also an experience. So a student in a higher education space today, they find that there are a lot less lectures, like this, me talking to you, but a lot more team projects, internships, overseas exchanges, community immersion, doing social work, and also entrepreneurship opportunities. So almost every student in higher education now, also, including those in the humanities, also have to undergo education modules in digital literacy. So you're a history student, you cannot escape quantitative reasoning and computational thinking, because all this has become an essential life and employability skill, employment skills. And after a student completes formative education, the real learning starts. He enters the job market, he learns on the job, and he embarks on lifelong learning. They learn through companies-based training. They learn by attending courses in training centers set up throughout the world, throughout Singapore. And these centers are largely privately run, but also publicly supported. 3 years ago, to make formative education and adult learning one seamless lifelong journey, we restructured the responsibilities of our ministries so that pre-employment education for students, continuing education and training for adult workers are restructured and put under one single ministry, which is the Ministry of Education. In India, you still have 2 separate ministries. I'm not suggesting that you should merge them because you are a much larger country, but we find it necessary to do that merger. And with that change, our polytechnics and universities have expanded their mandate, and they now play a critical role in lifelong learning. They are reaching out to members of their alumni and to the adult workforce to offer modular programs, short, relevant programs in data analytics, fintech, cybersecurity, advanced manufacturing, robotics, entrepreneurship. The National University of Singapore, for example, has declared that enrollment to NUS is now for 20 years. Of course, you still get your degree in 4 years, but you spend the other 15 years continuing to learn. And together with private providers, company-based training, they provide a robust adult training delivery system. In Singapore, we call this entire effort the Skills Future Movement. It is a decisive shift in the way we educate and develop our people. It will take many more years of painstaking effort. And there are many obstacles to overcome. And I think the biggest one, which I think India and Singapore share, is social mindset. This is because the focus on skills, just like training your daughters to be restless, it runs counter to how societies have traditionally defined success. What parents expect of their children and what individuals expect of ourselves. The desire for academic pursuit is very strong in most societies, even in Western societies. In Germany, for example, they have a long history of apprenticeship. But apprenticeship training in Germany is described as the golden floor, because even during a recession, craftsmen, they are still in demand, and they still command a good salary. Yet, young Germans increasingly, they prefer to attend gymnasiums or academic high schools, which prepare them for universities. The young, they are not looking for the security of a golden floor. They are chasing the hopes of doing big and great things. And in their minds, this can only be achieved if you have a university degree. You can't quite blame them, because after all, big companies, MNCs, global banks, top consultancy firms, they are more likely to hire someone with a university degree. And you also need a professional degree if you want to be a doctor, a lawyer, or an accountant. In Asia, that mindset is even more entrenched. Many Asian societies have very high graduate unemployment or underemployment rates because they simply have too many universities, too many graduates coming into the labor market. And even so, that has not shifted the traditional mindset nor social behavior. It's just very ingrained in our social culture. So I think it will be futile for us to try to change a mindset that is so deeply ingrained in our societies. Instead, let's recognize this is a false dichotomy. The pursuit of degrees and skills, they are not mutually exclusive. We now have our whole lifetime to improve both our knowledge and skills. We do not just have one traditional academic path, but we can choose from many diverse paths. On every one of these paths, knowledge and skills are concurrently attained. Study and work are not discrete phases of one's lifelong journey, but they are interspersed and they overlap with one another. And when we have developed deep expertise, regardless of the formal credentials, we then can accomplish big and great things. We have to let the results and the new realities speak for themselves. Education used to be front-loaded, formative, discrete, academic, and qualifications driven. Today, learning is lifelong, fluid, varied, dynamic, constant, skills-based, and passion-driven. I've been talking about reforming education and training to fulfill the dreams of the young in a digital world. But the reality is that in every country, for every young person dreaming of changing the world in this digital era, many more have much more basic needs, which is to find a job and feed my family. Growth is never even, and this duality can be very stark in many societies. And further, despite the rise of the digital economy, the reality is that most workers, we do not need to be IT specialists. Everyone needs to know how to work with and be assisted by technology. But most of us simply need to focus on improving our skills to do our current work well, be it serving customers, creating dishes in a restaurant, repairing or operating a machine, teaching young people, caring for patients, etc. And this is the second theme of my speech today, which is imparting basic skills to the masses. And this is arguably an even bigger preoccupation in the human development agenda. And let me again share Singapore's experience. In the course of Singapore's nation building, two particular national policies were decisive in transforming Singapore from third world to first. The first is our public housing policy, which was started soon after Singapore attained self-governance in 1959. And in fact, today, just yesterday was the anniversary of our self-governance, and before that we were governed from Calcutta. So home ownership gave families a direct stake in our economic growth. Generations of Singaporeans put their nest eggs in their homes, raised their families in it, lived their whole lives in it, and then passed them on to their children. And today, 90% or over 90% of Singaporean families own our homes. And this policy has helped citizens become self-reliant, stand on our 2 feet, and continues to anchor and unite the Singapore society. And the other national policy that stood out is education and skills training. We made English our common working language and the medium of instruction in schools. Generations of Singaporeans benefited with a good foundation in education. Every year, 2/3 of our cohort move on to technical training, either in the ITE or in the polytechnics. And we make sure that all courses are designed to meet the needs of the industries, and they find work when they graduate. So these two policies stood out because they strengthened Singaporeans' sense of being stakeholders in the growth of the Singapore economy and the building up of our nation. And they are both generative and distributive. Home ownership and education improve the ability of Singaporeans to contribute to the economy at the nation, and at the same time, they ensure that every family has a share in and benefit from the growth of that overall economic pie. And this policy strengthened the belief that as a people, we can work together and make Singaporean and Singapore succeed. Today, economic uncertainty looms large amongst the working population in many countries. It's a worry shared by both developed and emerging economies. So amongst developed economies, many have experienced stagnating real wages since the global financial crisis. And they continue to face the looming threat of disappearing jobs because of competition, industry disruption, or companies relocating to more competitive destinations. For these economies, the challenge is to restructure industries, for their companies to innovate and adopt productive practices to stay competitive, and for workers to operate at a higher level of competency and productivity. As for emerging economies, many need to train the working population in essential industrial and service skills. And despite the uncertainties about the future of global trade, we are living in a world that's more interconnected than ever, and with Asia being the fastest growing region in the world. India in particular is the fastest growing large emerging economy in the world and has tremendous potential for further growth. So skills training in this context is a no regrets move. To the investor, the availability of a skilled workforce provides assurance that whether your hotel or factory will be able to operate smoothly. To the worker, skills enable them to land a good, stable job and become self-reliant. India is seized by the need to impart essential employability skills to the masses. Skill India have the ambitious goal of upskilling 40 crore people, young and old, men and women, by 2022. The National Skills Development Corporation has built up an extensive network of training partners and centers across the country. The percentage of employable population has gone up steadily and progressively. And I have no doubt that this is a challenging and arduous task. The new Indian government has recently set up a new cabinet committee on employment and skills development, chaired by the Prime Minister himself, and that, I believe, will further invigorate India's efforts in this area. And I believe there's significant scope for India and Singapore to work closely together in this area of skills development. Singapore is small, we have limited resources, but notwithstanding this, I believe we can make a meaningful impact in this area. In 2003, we incorporated IT Education Services, or we call ITs, a company under ITE to undertake cooperation projects with other countries on human development. It gives us the discipline to undertake these projects in a financially sustainable way. And at the same time, ITs is given autonomy and operates independently to fulfill its mission. IT's first project in India was the world-class skills center in New Delhi. I visited it just yesterday, and it was set up in September 2013. This was followed by the Center of Excellence for Tourism Training in Udaipur, Rajasthan, and I visited that 2 years ago. And then followed by the Northeast Skills Center in Guwahati, Assam. More recently, ITs was engaged by the state governments of Madhya Pradesh and Odisha to develop 2 milestone projects to transform and upgrade their skills development systems. The first is to set up a center within the new Global Skills Park to be developed in Bhopal in Madhya Pradesh. The second is to set up a World Skills Center in Bhubaneswar, the capital city of Odisha. Both projects are funded through loans from the Asian Development Bank, which has also recognized ITs as their knowledge partners for the skills sector. When fully implemented, these centers will produce some 8,000 skilled personnel annually to support industries across India. ITs is now in discussion with several other state governments. ITs is also in discussion with various large Indian enterprises such as Tata Trust, Indian Oil, Team Lead Services, Rayat Educational and Research Trust to establish skills institutions in various cities in India. And it is very critical to bring enterprises into the skills development picture, because to transform a workforce, all hands must be on deck, and employers, frankly, is the largest stakeholder. Employers are also best placed to decide what kind of training is most relevant to the job market and benefit both workers and companies most. And we need enterprises that can go beyond training for their own needs to also train workers for their whole industry. And I'm encouraged by all these developments that ITs is embarking on in India. I've told ITs, and I invited the CEO to join me for this trip, and I told ITs, stretch your ambition, build up your capacity, expand your network of partners, so that skills development and human capital development can be an area of significant bilateral cooperation between India and Singapore. And we should do so in a financially sustainable way. With the support of national initiatives such as Skill India and the state governments, ITs, I believe, can help more workers in India develop relevant skills and secure good jobs. In the process, Singapore will be able to tap on our industry professionals to further build up expertise in skills and vocational training. So it will be a win-win cooperation. India, let me conclude. India and Singapore, we are vastly different countries. We are a small city-state with limited resources, and we have no choice but to be open to the world in order to earn a living. India, you are a big country, an ancient civilization with very complex challenges. Yet, we have many similarities. Singapore grew from third world to first in a generation, and we continue to try to break new grounds in city planning, smart city solutions, education, and skills future. India's economic transformation is even more remarkable. You are now the fastest growing major emerging economy in the world. Millions of Indians are lifted out of poverty every year, and the middle class has quadrupled over the last 25 years. You have implemented significant national initiatives on such a large scale, such as Aadhaar, GST, reform of the bankruptcy laws, and now pushing ahead with the building of smart cities. And amidst all these transformations, we are also traditional societies, firm in family values, steadfast in our hopes and dreams for our young, and investing in our children to ensure they have a bright future. Today's challenges, of course, go beyond our children, and as a society, we need to invest in all our people, deepen their skills, develop their abilities to do their jobs well, master their craft. And by doing so, everyone will have a stake in the collective success of our countries, and this will strengthen the cohesiveness of our societies. Thank you.
Now you know why this subject was included in the agenda for this meeting, because it's not just relevant to third world countries, but also very much to first world countries. What's happening today and the whole process of education and then skills development. Thank you very much, Minister, for that outstanding keynote address. We'll go to our panelists, and I'll go to the lady first. Anita, you represent a great group in India, Tatars, and you're doing some very interesting stuff.
Honorable Minister, my distinguished co-panelists, and ladies and gentlemen, it's a pleasure for me to be here representing the Tata Group and to share with you my thoughts on this extremely relevant and interesting topic. One of the things I truly believe that Singapore for India serves as a role model is the way Singapore has very tightly knitted together its demand and its talent development value chain. And I think that is something that we really, really need to learn from, and we constantly look up to you on that. But today, I'm here to talk about India. As we all know, technology has disrupted businesses beyond belief, whether it's Nike, which crowdsources its advertising campaign, or the fact that we are able to track health parameters just looking at on our wrists. All of these has disrupted businesses. And India, as an emerging economy, is very tightly knitted to benefit from all of this digitization with the launch of Digital India. But the question that is most relevant is this huge talent explosion that is before us. How is it being managed? What are the kind of livelihoods that the masses of Indians, and Indians, of course, we talk in billions and millions of young people, what are our institutions gearing up to teach for the future? What are our young people's aspirations, and how aware are they of these huge changes? How is the young person sitting in Aligarh, for instance, aware of the huge changes that Amazon can bring to his life or all the other technology disruptions? Are our institutions teaching the right things? And are our faculty geared with the right skills? As we all know, India's opportunity is huge by building through the digital ecosystem. We are told it's about $1 trillion. I believe that this kind of huge transformation and the pace of change is so rapid that to trickle down to the rest and distant corners of India, we need a digital highway as quickly as possible. But the question we need to really confront is, how does every Indian really leverage this huge economic possibility? And the way Tata Strive, which is the skill development initiative of the Tata Group, looks at it is, we need to look at three things. We need to look at the mindset. We need to look at skill sets. What are the kind of skills that people need? Collaboration, learning to learn. What are the kind of tool sets that people need? Domain skills, sectoral skills, technology. What do we mean by digital literacy in India? Do we need to reinvent the meaning of that word? If we look at these three lenses, and that's what my focus will be on, let's take a look at what's happening in the demand and supply chains. From the demand side, we all are aware that automation is here to stay. There will be some jobs that are lost, but they will equally be replicated by new jobs emerging. And we can see this in many sectors that are being very highly disrupted by technology, whether it's logistics, healthcare, IT of course, automotives, all these sectors are being very highly disrupted. There is also the gig economy, and I mean it in the broadest term, because in India, a lot of people do part-time jobs anyways, mostly from an informal sector. So while gig economy has an elitist twist to it, I mean it really in the broadest word. Then we have the platform model, which to my mind is the most interesting opportunity. The Uberization of business models. We've seen it happening in sector after sector, and I think that that is what we're going to see in the future, which will be able to connect to our large, dispersed, organized sectors, our large informal sector. Look what it's done to driving. Look what it's doing to our textile sector, for instance. There are a number of examples where this can be a game changer. The other offset of that is the kind of collaboration it brings to the table. Ola and Uber have created an ecosystem of informal drivers becoming now entrepreneurs and part of the business model. That's a whole new game change. On the other side, when we look at labor trends, there's something very interesting happening there as well. It is the reality of contractualization of jobs. It's here to stay. It may not be attractive to our young people, but that's the reality. And we need not to swim against the tide, but to provide this reality to our young people. The second aspect is that of gender. Only 27% of women are participating in the workforce, and that's the big mystery in India. How do we bring them back? Maybe we need to reimagine the concept of part-time work, home businesses where the woman can manipulate her own time. And I believe I was very happy to learn that NSDC is in talks with World Bank to look at this aspect very carefully. The other concept that we need to look at from the labor market perspective is reskilling. Almost 300 million people will need to be reskilled in the next couple of years. What burden does it place on industry? What burden does it place on each one of us, on the education system? And finally, the other trend that I'd like to highlight is the era of specialization. We do live in highly specialized verticals. What does it do for our informal sector? 90% of our workforce is actually in the informal sector. How are we going to bring these masses out into the formal sector? And a teeny-weeny contribution towards that is done by organizations like ours. So I too, Minister, was very happy to hear about the committee that the government has set up and was announced very recently to focus on employment and skill development. And as you know, employment and jobs was a big part of our recent elections. So governments can come and go based on this agenda. So I personally am really happy about it. But I want to highlight a very peculiar development or reality of the Indian workforce. Of course, in all countries, you have people who are scholars, the PhDs and the high professionals. We have graduates and engineers, and then we have those who didn't quite get that below graduation, may have dropped out. In India, what is happening is, because of the glut of graduates and engineers, so many colleges coming up, and you mentioned that in your talk, Minister, we have too many young people who are graduates and engineers but do not have the right employability skills. Our larger issue is that of those who are below graduation level. And what happens is, because the graduates and engineers don't have the right skills as yet, they look at jobs which are really in the gambit of those who are below graduates. So you get a sort of tug of war happening at some of the entry-level job skills. At the same time, you have a deficit of professional skills at the top level. Now, this is a very disturbing factor in India which needs to be addressed. The second thing that happens because of this is there is no premium on skills then. Because you have a lot of people in the entry-level jobs, and if I, as Tata Strive, provide skills, I want to ensure this person gets a delta on his or her wage, which becomes a challenge for me because there are just too many people. On the other hand, if you look at what the youth and where the mismatch sometimes is that while the people who are scholars are better placed, we need to have systems to encourage more research and innovation. The industry wants more research and innovation. We want more PhDs in the country, and that needs to be encouraged. So what you see before you is what the youth mindset is, and on the left side you see ideally what industry partners would want. The second issue with graduates is that this is where the maximum unemployment is. It is about 19% for women and about a little over 9% for men, whereas it is much lower in the people who are not graduates. It's as less as 2% for men and maybe 9% for women. So that's the difference. So does education really enable a job? That's the question we are asking ourselves. What can we do to address this? At the same time, employers want certain priorities to be addressed when they onboard young people. And these are actually the hygiene factors of what we call employability skills. It's also called life skills. It's also called soft skills, which includes non-cognitive, social, emotional skills, and foundational skills, basic things, digital literacy, knowledge of technology. And I believe in India, we need to redefine what we mean by digital literacy. It isn't just knowing how to use a computer. It's about knowing what WhatsApp can do as a marketplace for you. It's to know what privacy you need to be aware of when you're going on Facebook. I think our description of digital literacy, if we have to become a digital economy, needs to completely be relooked at. So if I were to just crystal gaze and say that we need to fix a few things, and I believe that is already happening, but whether it's my colleagues here from CII, organizations like mine, a lot of you from other corporates who are addressing this, there are three things that we are all working on. First of all is the information gap. Next is skill gap and the systemic gap. By information gap, I mean helping children make more informed decisions. Because the pace of change is so rapid and fast at one end, and there is another India that is really not aware of all of this, they don't make decisions based on information. So, government jobs are still very attractive. they would wait and continue to graduate, to do their post-graduation and keep applying for government jobs, sometimes wasting their time. Only 4% of jobs are with government, but almost 80% of people will try for it. So I don't know, one of my colleagues was very in a casual manner saying, maybe we would need to disincentivize government jobs. Maybe that's the solution. I don't know. But this is a reality. Contract jobs, big no-no. If it's a contract job, I don't want to do it. And I'm talking about the masses that we work with. I'm not talking about urban, evolved youth. So this information we need to be putting it out, that that's the way the world is going. Nano unicorns is an interesting concept of rural entrepreneurship. While Startup India is taking off, what's happening in rural India? We need rural startups also. And nano unicorns of working with people in villages to look at unmet needs and helping them start one at a time is a project that we're doing with Odisha government. And we're very proud of this project. It's called Nano Unicorns, and we are building entrepreneurs with small enterprises, employing 1 or 2 people. The other thing is on skill gap. I've mentioned this before, but maybe it needs to re-emphasized, that technical expertise is of course required. But more than that, what we hear employers and all my Tata companies saying, let's take children or young people who have positive mindsets, are willing to learn, have basic communication skills. This is a hygiene factor. If you have that, the domain skills can be invested upon by companies. And as you know, in India, a lot of companies have their own captive training centers. They're willing to do that. But what they do not have the bandwidth to do is to work on the soft skills, because that needs time to change. And when you're on the job, that must be a hygiene factor.
Anissa, we are running out of time.
Sure,
so if you
I'm
could
just
please.
done. Sure. The other thing is the systemic gap, which I believe education needs to fix in terms of doing vocationalization of education, looking at how education should incorporate skills into the system. If we do that, I believe India can become a very vibrant economy where community enterprise, entrepreneurship, and employment-based all coexist. 1 or 2 examples before I close is what the Tata Group is doing. Government and business can work very closely together. Government brings in legitimacy, scale, while businesses bring in efficiency and technology. A few examples about the cancer grid is something that Tata Trust, the Department of Atomic Energy, is done together with TCS. We've created a digital nerve center where someone who is suffering from cancer in a village has access to a local hub, a regional hub, and a national hub. The tests may be done locally. A doctor sitting in a regional hub may actually, through telemedicine, diagnose what the problem is, and only if required, the person may need to travel to a big city. That's a big project that Tatas have invested in. Another example is that of Internet Sathi, which trains women in villages to use internet. Many of them are becoming entrepreneurs because of that. Similarly, Tata Strive works with the ITIs to bring in technical skills along with the governments of various states. These are some examples that I wanted to share with you. And just on a closing note, Tata Strive, the company that I work with, is contributing in a small way by coupling together technology and pedagogy. As I said, in India, we need to be sensitized to both. To be a digital economy, we need to work with both sensitive to what our masses want, as well as one eye on what technology can help for us. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Gabriel, over to you.
Good morning. Thank you very much. On behalf of the International Labour Organization, I'd like to thank the organizer, particularly the CII, for bringing us here. It's really right time that we're given opportunity to speak on the future of work or eventually the future of skills. The International Labour Organization has developed or has conducted a study on the future of work, which was launched in January 22nd. And the committee was composed of 22 members, chaired by the President of South Africa and Netherlands, and 2 members from India represents this 28-member committee. One of the major recommendations on the future of work really focused on investment in human capital. And it has 3 recommendations, one of which was highlighted by His Excellency Minister of Education of Singapore on focusing on lifelong learning. That's early childhood to post-employment. So this is really the focus of my some sort of a discussion here. I was given 2 sets of questions, like really what's the effect of the digitalization in a structural jobless growth. Really, before answering that question, I really have to look at, it's not only digitalization that has triggered the future of work or the effect of work. There are, I think, at least 3 drivers that will influence the skills and the future of work, other than the automation. One of which, or the second one, is what we call as the deeper economic integration. And you will note that India, as part of Asia Pacific, has 40% of the global trade and is closely integrated into global and regional value chain. We have India plus ASEAN plus India, the BRICS, these regional trade agreements is really strengthening. So it has also an effect or influence on the future of work. The second one is really on the demographic transition. India, as a middle country, faces the challenge of preparing the young job seekers with the skills to compete with the rapidly expanding workforce. Just to note that India will miss the demographic dividend in the next 10 years. India would be now into aging population by year 2030. The third one that will influence the future of skills is really what we call as the transition to greener skills and jobs. Efforts towards the workforce readiness will also need to consider the greening production in job. Transition to green economy does not really say, let's go for green. It's really, from the point of view of the industry, increasing the productivity and efficiency of the work. So it's, to do that, you have to do green production or green skills. Going back to the effect of automation or digitalization, the International Labour Organization had conducted a study in the 9 member states of Association of Southeast Asian Nations, and that includes Singapore, that says on the effect of automation in 4 industrial sectors. One of the most major finding of which was really focusing on that the workers most at risk of the technology automation in the workplace are women and the less educated, as well as those working in routine in manual work. So these are the 2 key areas that we need to address in terms of automation. Now, there's a question here now of this forum that how do we make sure that there should be no structural jobless growth? Yeah, I do have taken note of what the Minister of Education have said, that really, and also with our co-panelists here, one key recommendation of the International Labour Organization is for workers to have what we call as core skills for employability. In the context where jobs were less permanent and uncertain, skills development efforts needs to enable workers to have a broader scope of career prospects. Lifelong learning has even more become important. Flexibility and adaptability of workers need to be harnessed, not only on the vocational skills, which I stand corrected. Singapore has a good battle cry for that. They never use the word vocational. It's really technical education as a whole. So we don't need vocational or technical education as part of the intervention, but need to be built on core employability skills like communication, digital skills, problem solving, and generally the so-called ability to learn, or what the co-panelist here says as the learnability, has to be highlighted in terms of the intervention. That's one recommendation. The second recommendation would be the multi-skilling. Equipping workers with a skill set that are relevant to multiple occupations within the same sector cluster, as opposed to a single occupation, could provide workers with flexibility that we'll need in the future. This is one of the recommendations in the future, or the Global Commission report on the future of work. The third recommendation is really looking at the seamless pathway of education. 2011 ISKED definition of education has expanded to skills that are gained informally and be part of the education system. The International Labor Organization is working with the member states in terms of restructuring its educational system. Take the case of Bangladesh, Afghanistan, and Sri Lanka. We're working into harmonizing the skills qualification framework and the higher education framework. Although in India, there is what we call as the National Skills Qualification Framework that was officially approved in 2013. That really says that it should be the framework that would work into a seamless pathways from skills to higher education. The fourth recommendation really looks at inclusivity. The role of skills is significant, in particular for the inclusion of more women in disadvantaged group as people with disabilities in labor force and their access to better employment. I would go to my second question that really says that how do we make skills development and updating it more effective and ensure the complementary role of both the government and the business sector? One recommendation here is really on the anticipation of skills demand. India is looking at it, but I'd like to highlight an example of Singapore again, which they have what we call as the skills force or skills future that really forecasted the needs of the future, the needs of the skills in the future. The other example was really for the labor market information system of the government of Canada that really has this forecasting or anticipation of the skills demand. Another recommendation here is making formal training system more responsive. India is doing it. They're reforming the ITIs. They're looking at revising the curricula that would address the industry needs. Fourth recommendation is industry engagement and demand-led approach to skills. In layman's terms, we would like to really make sure that the industry plays a major role in the skills development through work-based learning. Apprenticeship is a focal point or a focal delivery system in India and is true also to other middle-income countries. Then another one is the preparedness of the skills development for meeting the vulnerable workers, which is one of the key target client in terms of attaining the SDG 2030 that says that no one should be left behind, and partly or majority of these are the disadvantaged group. By that, thank you very much, and looking forward to future discussions.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Minister, I have a first question to you. I think your mic is on, but in any case, we put a hand mic there also as insurance policy. Maybe that's more convenient.
Hello. Okay, that's better. Thank you.
Some years ago, there was a sense that the demands from other countries like India on ITE would be difficult for them to fulfill because of they were so busy with their own work. But you referred in your speech about capacity building. So potentially, India with 29 states could have 29 different collaborations with IT. That's the demand. That's the scale of the number of people to be trained and skilled here. Are you continuously upgrading the skill? And where does scale fit in, this new thing? I mean, so who are we going to all work with
Thank
as
you.
we go forward?
The mathematics have not changed.
Okay.
We are still very small and you have a huge population. So I do not think it's possible for IT to fulfill all the needs of India. After all, you have a ministry with very capable people, with a Skill India initiative that is ramping up program in this area. But in my discussion with Minister Jaishankar yesterday, he said something quite interesting. To say, while Singapore is small, you can be a catalyst. And he's a chemist. So he said that as a catalyst, you can play a big role. And I thank him for pointing that out. And I think despite our small scale and ITE, having set up a dedicated unit in ITs to do this, I think we have to selectively see what are the areas where we can make a demonstrative role. The way, let's say, a way a center is run, the kind of courses, the kind of employment services, the way it's managed, how can we share experiences, make it a demonstrative project so that other centers can also visit it, visit and learn from it. So that way, I think we can have a ripple effect in the way we do things, so that while projects we are directly involved in may be small in scale, may be few, but the impact hopefully can be bigger and can be magnified.
And what about scale? Scale is a different process?
Scale. Oh,
Scale.
scale is
NUS.
under, okay, I thought you meant scale with a small s. The Dean of Scale is here in the audience. Yeah, he's just put up his hand. Scale is a unit just like ITs, but at the university level. So I very much will also encourage not just the National University of Singapore, but also our polytechnics. And in fact, and our Nanyang Polytechnic also have a similar outfit. The CEO is also here, Henry, he just put up his hand. But I would say, amongst all the outfits, ITs has done the most and probably understand India's needs the most. And I will encourage all our institutes to have their units, work with IT, see how we can make a meaningful impact. As I say, while small, I hope that this can grow to be a bilateral cooperation that's meaningful and can help India and also help Singapore.
What is the process that you follow internally on skills future? You know, you're looking ahead, it's been referred to here, anticipating what skills are required. What's the process? How does it work? It's education ministry, it's other people. Can you give us a sense of how you evolve policy and strategy?
It's an interesting question because as I was writing this speech, I was reflecting what are the key steps we took over the last 5 years, and I documented them and I delivered the speech just now. And I hope it sounds coherent. I hope it sounds like we planned it all, but the truth is, I don't think we planned it from the beginning. You have to first have a very clear direction, what is guiding your policy, and the rest, to be honest, you make it up as you go along. And sometimes there's an opportunity to make a change here, and sometimes there's another opportunity there, but you always have to be consistent. What are we guided by? And our guidance is always, you have to focus on skills and employability. Start young, and start young because you need to cultivate the passion. Without passion, you can't have lifelong learning. So these are the key parameters and consideration, and where you have to change, we have to adjust. Whether it's scores, whether it's the way we calculate academic scores and grades, the way we plan our curriculum, whether we articulate from one phase of education to another, what do we teach in universities and polytechnics, how do we structure ourselves for lifelong learning? then all the pieces start coming in place, but provided your guiding principles and parameters must be very clear. Yeah.
Are you getting requests and demands from other countries also for cooperation and support?
We are constantly, so exchange of information is always welcome, and we learn a lot too by exchanging information with others. But physical delivery, I think that is where constraints are. So I would say outfits like ITs are useful to allow us to set aside some resources, build up resources in this area. And honestly, I think the key areas we can make a difference is probably within ASEAN, India, maybe a little bit of China.
What about first world countries?
Usually they would not have the same phase of growth. They are not in a similar phase of growth. So I make a differentiation just now. We also collaborate with, say, UK or Germany, but they have a very different way, different problem. They have actually focused a lot, especially continental Europe. They have for years focused on skills and apprenticeship. Switzerland especially have an interesting model where only 20% of every cohort go to university. 80% actually go for vocational and apprenticeship, and they call it as such. They don't need euphemism like us to say it's skills, it's technical. Yeah. They call it apprenticeship, and it's still widely accepted in their society. But their challenge is a different one, which is the job nature is changing. They worry about the future of jobs and whether there will be replacement, substitution of robots for workers. And so they are also on the productivity curve trying to do their best. And that we therefore exchange expertise on the different level with a different objective and different problem to solve.
Budget is not a problem?
Budget is always a problem.
Always a problem.
It's our common problem. So we just have to see what, just as all commercial companies have to face the reality of limited budget, and within what budget you have, do the best you can.
Okay. Maybe we can take one or two questions from the floor before Minister has another meeting shortly, so we'll have to shut down. Any hands up? No? No. I wanted to bring in Mr. Banerjee, Director General of CII, because you are doing a lot of work, not only on skills training, but also placement of jobs. Would you like to share for a minute what you're doing? This one part is the training, and the other part is getting them employed in India.
Thank you, Mr. Das. Honorable Minister, there are actually three types of programs that CII runs. One is, of course, the multi-skill training centers that we run, and much of it has been talked. But more interesting, another model that we is we call the Model Career Center. Career Center is where a polytechnic graduate comes in to these centers, and we are doing this across the country today. And it's like a just a finishing where there are companies from both the services sector as well as the manufacturing sector. They sit around with them to get their get some soft skills imparted, as well as also, in fact, we try and assess what are their deficits, and we try and in a very strong crash course of about 2 weeks, get them to understand those deficits that they have in terms of the mismatch of, and we also help them to prepare a sort of a curriculum vitae of theirs. And then the companies that are in these skilling centers, on these model career centers, they understand the type of, they assess the people, and then we try to sort of give them an offer of jobs which they can fit into. So it's sort of a skilling center come employment exchange. And we are finding through that, and it takes just about a month or so for the candidate when he comes in and for him to get a job offer. But obviously he comes after he has done his polytechnic graduation. So this is something which is really helping translate some of the skills into jobs, because that's the biggest challenge that we have, and which Anita in her presentation somewhere also alluded to, is basically where we see skills of a particular kind being imparted, but there still remains a gap in terms of the type of requirement the industry has. But this really helps us finish the candidate up to make him job ready and give him the job offer?
That is meaningful. I congratulate you for that effort. But if I were to recommend, that actually needs to go into the main curriculum of the polytechnics, which we started recently to introduce into our secondary school. So what you mentioned, we now try to start at upper secondary so that the child, even as he learns a subject and a skill, he has an eye towards careers and industries. And in polytechnics, in our polytechnics, they go for internships. They are constantly in touch with employers so that we make no apology that we are educating you for a career and a job.
We have this huge problem of the mindset. They want to go to college and they want to graduate and then be unemployed.
I have to share with you, yesterday I went to the World Class Skills Center. They were very proud. They say they have long queues queuing up for enrollment every year. And some of them are even university graduates, but they decided their mindset has changed. They want to learn a skill to help them find a job, which is good. But as I move around the center and I speak to the young people, and I say, what are you going to do after this training? They say they're going to go to college. Yeah, some go to university, others will do an online open university. The desire is there. I don't think we can change that because it's cultural. It's cultural. I think it's a futile fight if we think this is the problem. I think we just have to make sure, ground them in skills, tap into their passion, and with passion, with skills, they will do a good job. They will advance in their career, regardless of their formal credentials, because I think employers are practical and will recognize that. And then let the result speak for itself. And over time, that culture may slowly shift, as it has in Switzerland.
Yeah. In our society, we have another phenomenon. You know, on the Sunday newspapers, there are pages and pages of advertisements of people looking for husbands or wives. And very often, we want a graduate, you know, or a postgraduate. It's a pre-qualification for to be a husband or a wife. This is a huge issue. This is also a cultural issue.
In Singapore, we have some of that, but we do it online. There were apps.
Anybody else to ask a question before I conclude? No? Yeah, is there a hand up? Yes, please, go on. Please make it brief. And
my question is to all the panelists. See, in our country,
we can't hear you.
in India, Industrial Training Institute, Polytechnic, engineering colleges, business schools, they are churning out every year thousands and thousands of students. After passing out from these institutions, when they go to the corporate, to the manufacturing industry for employment, you are not unemployable. You are not having the skill, and I will not give you any employment. And this phenomenon is existing for the last 10 to 15 years. But the corporate, unfortunately, they don't tabulate, they don't tell where is the deficiency, and they don't sit with the academia, those institutions who are training. So my question to you is, what the government intervention should be there, Ministry of Skill Development and Entrepreneurship, that is ministry set up 5 years back, so that this problem should end forever. Student passing out should not have any problem getting employment. This is a very, very big issue.
That's going to be very tough, I think. I don't know if you want to comment. Have you understood the question?
I think he's saying graduates coming out are unemployable.
That's right,
and that is
That's right.
structural unemployment. I think this used to work. Even if you send someone to university and coming out, even if what they learn is not relevant to industry, it works because in earlier days, not many people go to university. Yeah. And just by being able to go through that education, it shows that the person is of some caliber with certain cognitive ability. But that works only if a small proportion go to university, because it serves as a market signal Today, that's not the case. A vast number of people go to university, and you therefore have to make sure that the education is relevant to industry. Then that's a big gap, and I think the gap, you can't fill it overnight, but enterprises can step in and start to have in-house training that bridge the employability gap.
One of the, yes, Gabriel, sorry.
Can I elaborate on that if I got it right? Hello. This is happening in most developing and middle level income countries. They call it structural unemployment. You have a lot of graduates looking for job. On the other hand, in the demand, there are lots of companies looking for right workers with the right competencies. I don't know if that's the issue here, but we are advocating on a battle cry, and it's a good model. The Singapore is a good model of that. We have this, what we call that, on your way to university or on your way to college, please drop by technical education. So if I have a welding certificate, it can go as high as Bachelor of Science in Mechanical Engineering. And that's why we are advocating this seamless educational system, that one certificate qualification can lead to an engineering. So that's why I think, I don't know if I got your question right.
One of the, maybe then my last question is, there are a lot of private universities coming up now in India, which is good because we need, much more capacity in the university system also. But standards, quality of teaching, quality of faculty, you must have got a tough system of standard setting, review, accreditation. How do you manage this process?
We have a system of standard setting and regulation. I wouldn't call it tough, but some years ago we started to require that all private universities be registered. Some countries go to the extent of banning them. We decided not to because it's not possible. You can now enroll for a degree program online. So therefore we allow them to operate. But what is the latest thing we have done, that was 2 years ago, as part of their licensing requirement, they have to conduct employment survey of their graduates, of fresh graduates. And then we will compile them. It's based on our standards. The survey is based on our standards, and we will publish those results. And it shows a big difference between publicly funded autonomous university versus private universities. And even amongst private universities, there's a big varied results of graduate employment. And at least we put the information out to the public, and students have to decide.
Thank you very much, and thank you for playing this leadership role in skill development and training and education
Thank
for
you
the
very
future.
much. We are in
Thank
this
you, Minister.
together. Let's work together.
And thank you very much, members of the panel, Anita and Gabriel. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, I am pleased to announce that the Confederation of Indian Industry and the School of Continuing and Lifelong Education at the National University of Singapore will be entering into a memorandum of understanding to collaborate on creating a strong future manufacturing ecosystem in India by imparting knowledge on emerging technologies and solutions leading to the development of the overall competitiveness of industry in both India and Singapore. The activities under the purview of this MOU would include joint surveys among Indian manufacturing companies to determine their exact needs and demand for training and education, sensitization and outreach programs and on courses offered by NUS Scale, sharing of information relating to future manufacturing technologies and solutions to improve competitiveness. We are now joined on stage by Professor Wei, Dean of the School of Continuing and Lifelong Education, National University of Singapore, and Mr. Chandrajit Banerjee, Director General of Confederation of Indian Industry. Thank you everyone for witnessing this momentous occasion. Ladies and gentlemen, we now break for tea, which is served in Shah Jahan Hall. The next session will begin in 15 minutes right here. Thank you.
One more? Okay, I'll add.